All right. Good afternoon and welcome to our virtual workshop series titled The Employee Experience Revolution. In just a few moments, you're going to be hearing from our Vice President of Consulting and future best-selling author, Dave Murray. Before we get started, just a few things I want to make sure that you guys are aware of. There are two different ways that you'll be able to communicate with us today. Any type of logistical questions, how to follow up, how to get more information, you can go ahead and put in the chat feature. You'll see a little chat bubble at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will be monitoring the chat the entire time Dave is presenting today, and I will make sure that you have everything that you need. Second, Dave will be taking live questions at the end of his presentation today. So any questions that you would like him to go over later, just go ahead and put in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen as well, and we'll make sure that Dave gets to any and all questions that you may have before we end our time together today. And then lastly, I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered for today's virtual workshop. You will be receiving a copy of the recording of today's webinar, and also a copy of Dave's slide deck, as well as some additional resources from the DiJulius group. So now I am going to turn it over to Dave.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Thanks for being here, everybody. It's great to have you aboard. Today, we are going to talk about the employee experience revolution. Lindsay already introduced me, but for those of you that have not seen before, my name is Dave Murray. I am the Vice President of Consulting for the DiJulius Group. I'm thrilled to be here with you today. And today we're going to talk about starting your own employee experience revolution. And we call this a virtual workshop. We did that on purpose because I want you to take some notes. I want you to really think about how the things that we're talking about pertain to your organization right now. And my goal is that you walk away from our 1 hour together today with some action items that you can start talking with your leaders, with your teams, and really start to have this focus really just from this 1 hour session today. That's my hope. So let's get started. Our session today is brought to us by the brand new Employee Experience Executive Academy. We have a new class starting in September of 2024. If you would like to get some more information on this class, you can do so by scanning the barcode on your screen now. That will get you right to Claudia Medica on our team, and she can answer any questions you have, give you any information you need on the Employee Experience Executive Academy, or really anything DiJulius Group, whether you're potentially thinking about some workshops or some of our online training, whatever that may be. Claudia has all the answers. So let's get started. As Lindsay mentioned, a lot of what I'm talking about today is coming from our new book, The Employee Experience Revolution. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to write this book with best-selling author John DiJulius, our founder and leader of our organization. And we really dug into the employee experience because we know how important it is to deliver a great external experience. You have to build the foundation of a strong internal experience in order to have your team members go out and do that. So the book, The Employee Experience Revolution, will be coming out in May or so. And if you would like to pre-order, we've heard from a lot of folks that wanted to pre-order this for their teams and have them read them together as kind of a book club, a chapter a week, etc. So if you'd like to go ahead and get that order in, you can use this barcode to get that information. I will show both of these scan codes again at the end of the session. And then obviously, as Lindsay mentioned, you'll be getting a copy of my slides as well as the recording itself. So you'll have access to these codes again, should you need them. So again, let's get diving into the employee experience revolution. So there are 9 chapters in the book. I'm just going to go through them really quickly here up on your screen so you can get an idea of what the book is about. But we're going to talk about 2 main concepts on this session today. We are going to talk about internal culture, creating and cultivating a strong internal culture, and then developing your leaders. We know those things are so important. So focusing on and being purposeful about an internal culture that's going to keep your team members working well together and happy, and also developing your leaders to nurture that culture and to keep it going. We're going to start on the leadership side of things. And I'm going to tell you some of the things that are currently not working well in most organizations. And you can think about what that might look like in your workplace right now. And we'll talk about some things that you can do to make it better. So here's the problem with leadership in a lot of organizations, right? In a lot of organizations, there isn't a training manual on how to be a leader. Some organizations do use some third-party training or tools, or maybe even have some leadership programs that train future leaders or current leaders on how to be better leaders, but most organizations don't. As a matter of fact, there's a pretty new statistic out that says this, that 82% of managers are considered accidental managers. Now, how they define an accidental manager is quite simply, they have the title, but they have very little managerial training. And that happens in so many organizations. So here's a couple of scenarios when we ask the question, how does this happen? Here's a couple of scenarios, and think about this for a minute. Does this happen in your workplace, right? Sometimes we have to promote Steve because he's our best salesperson. And if we don't promote him, he's going to go somewhere else, right? Other organizations know how good he is and they want him, right? Or we have to promote Mary because she just finished her MBA and she's going to be on the market and sought after if we don't give her that promotion. Or maybe it's Keith. Keith has been here for 6 years now, and he's going to get the itch to go somewhere else. Let's give him a team and give him that next step to keep him here and keep him happy, right? A lot of times those are scenarios that get people promoted into a leadership position. And very rarely do these criteria come into play. Is this person going to be a great mentor of others? Are they a good coach, right? Are they coaching in the moment? Are they focused on training their team members? Are they focused on inspiring their team, right? So there are so many important things that go into being a great leader that usually are not part of training new leaders or when people get promoted. Here's another really important statistic, maybe one of the most important statistics we talk about all day, right? So the single most important determinant of an individual's performance with the organization and their commitment to stay. So when we combine those two things together, how well they're going to do in their job and their commitment to stay in their role really come down to one really important thing, and that is the relationship they have with their immediate manager. To me, I don't understand why more organizations aren't focused on this as a strategy. The data tells us how important this is, yet most organizations aren't making sure that their leaders are focused on building that relationship with their team members and nurturing them through the process of guiding them through their career, getting them where they want to go, or even just building that relationship to help them be great in their current role, right? It's usually not part of the training. And here's another statistic that's relatively new that really backs up what we're talking about right here. In a very recent study, this one was the correlation between happiness at work and overall life satisfaction. So not just satisfaction in your job, satisfaction in your life. One of the biggest determinants, as you see on the right-hand side here, relationship you have with management at work, right? It's so important. It's important to us as far as our view of ourselves, how we value ourselves, right? But again, this is not typically a strategy that most organizations are focused on when it comes to training their leaders and making sure they have some training best practices and leading best practices in place. It's just not looked at very often. So why is this? Why does this happen? Well, at the DiJulius Group, we get to work with a lot of great organizations, and we learn a lot of great things when we're out there working with these team members. I was in Dallas not too long ago working with Texas 811. They're the call before you dig people. I'm sure you've seen their commercials in your particular market, wherever it is that you live. And while we were doing a world-class internal culture workshop, so talking about a lot of things that we'll be talking about today, their chief people officer raised her hand and said something really, really insightful. We were talking about why don't we focus on being leaders, and why don't we spend more time focused on our leadership and how well we're doing and how we're nurturing our teams and how our teams are performing. You know, we're always so focused on tasks and results. And she raised her hand and said this, and it really stood out to me. She said, in their particular organization of Texas 811, too many of us see our value as doers, right? Because that's how you came up in the ranks. You were a good doer. You got the job done. You were a go-to person. People could give you tasks. They know they'd get them done, right? So that's how you felt your value, by getting that task completed. So they focused on being doers. And as they grow in the ranks, they still focus on being the doer as opposed to being the leader. And that great quote came to us from Shakina Harrison at Texas 811. And it was so eye-opening. Another reality in our world today is the busyness trap, right? The Harvard Business Review wrote a great article in the spring of this year about the busyness trap. And if you have a subscription, maybe you read it. If you don't, I'll save you some time. You don't have to look the article up. It really came down to one important takeaway. We wear busyness as a badge of honor, right? The busier we are, the more value we feel. We feel that we're indisposable because of that. So we like to be busy. But a lot of times, especially when it comes to leadership, that busyness comes at the expense of some other things that we don't value as much as like relationship building or some of the other things that we'll be talking about today. All right. So think about what happens in your world. And here's another thing about world-class leadership. I love this quote. This is from speaker and founder of Petra Consulting, Andy Bailey, when he said, stop confusing activity with achievement. Just because you have a long list of things to do and you're kind of knocking some things out doesn't necessarily mean that you're achieving anything. And I think that happens a lot with leaders, especially new leaders. We get bogged down in having to complete tasks, drive production. So our teams are looking like they're doing a good job, but we're skipping some of the really important things that we should be focused on as leaders. So how do we drive employee engagement? Right. So as I mentioned, we want this to be a little bit of a workshop. We want you to get some takeaways. It's not just me telling you what's wrong with leadership today. We want you to find some ways to make some improvements. So one thing that the research tells us that can really help move the needle as far as employee engagement, building those relationships, supporting your team members, is one-on-one meetings with leaders, with your direct reports. So managers meeting with the people on their team one-on-one. Now, I think I heard a collective phew from the audience, because some of you are like, oh, good, we're doing that. So we must be doing okay. But just because you're currently doing them or have this in place doesn't mean it's happening well. So there's two types of organizations on this call right now. Those that aren't doing one-on-one meetings at all, and that's okay. Listen in, pick up some tips, and maybe you can implement this in the future and start to incorporate these into your organizations. The other group on this call are people that are doing one-on-one meetings, maybe have it as a requirement for their leaders to conduct them, but maybe you're not really sure how well they're going, if they are effective. So here's some statistics that I want you to be thinking about as we talk about this topic. So first statistic, 94% of managers claim to schedule one-on-one meetings with their teams. Okay, that sounds pretty good, right? We know that this is an effective tool. We want it to be happening. 94% of managers are doing it, or at least scheduling. Great. Here's the downside, though. So if you already have one-on-ones in place, maybe you fall into this trap. The problem is 72% of one-on-one meetings are either rescheduled or canceled altogether, right? So just because 94% of managers say they are scheduling them, they aren't necessarily happening, right? So not only do they then go from what would have been a very productive and worthwhile meeting, they start to do the opposite, right? When they're not happening, when they're canceled because some other priority came up, we start to send that message internally that you are not the priority team member because I have to go work on this big client, or I have to go work on this, whatever that fire is that I have to put out, right? So think about, what does that look like in your world? I love this quote. This is from Joey Coleman in his book, Never Lose an Employee Again, which is a great read. Joey says, the harsh reality is that most employers value their relationships with prospects and customers much more than they value the relationship with their employees. Think about your organization. Maybe that's a reality. So here's the thing. whether you're already doing one-on-ones and you're thinking that maybe there's some room to improve, or you haven't started them yet, this next piece is really, really important. In order to roll out one-on-one meetings, we have to do something really important for our leaders. We have to give them 3 things to make this successful. You can't go back to your team later today or tomorrow and say, hey, I went to this virtual workshop and I heard that one-on-one meetings are important, so let's start doing those. Let's start them tomorrow, right? Because that's not necessarily going to work, and that's where a lot of organizations actually go wrong when it comes to this. You have to have a plan in place, and you have to give your leaders some very important things. First off, you have to give them the time to conduct these meetings. They have to know that these meetings are a priority, and sometimes you may have to help them make the time. Right? Sometimes they may have to delegate some other tasks or other things on their to-do list to other folks, delegate and elevate, as we like to say, so they can actually make time for these meetings to happen. One of the reasons that one-on-ones fail in organizations is there's not enough time, right? Well, it's not so much that there's not enough time. Usually what that means is it wasn't high enough a priority, which typically means the leaders don't understand how important they are to their success at being a leader and also the overall growth and stability of the organization. So give them the time to do that. Give them the permission. Make sure they know this is part of their job, right? This isn't a nice to have when you maybe we're getting close to the holidays, so your week's kind of slow next week, so let's jam some of these in, but we won't do them again until July or August. No, this you have to give them the permission that, hey, this is part of your job. This is an expectation that as a leader, we're doing this because we know it's going to help build better relationships. It's going to drive productivity. It's going to help us with our team member retention. There's so many factors that it helps with, right? So we have to give them permission, make sure they know it's part of their job. And then the third place is accountability. We have to have some sort of accountability. I hear so often that when I'm working with different organizations that, in some companies, certain departments just get to slide because they're so busy, they're so important. They don't have the time to do that. Yet then they wind up having maybe the highest turnover. And we say, oh, it's because they're so busy. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's because they're not making the time to focus on something as important as this. So the other thing that we've learned when it comes to implementing anything like a one-on-one meeting, or even on the customer experience side of things, when we're working with companies and deploying, say, customer service huddles for the first time, one thing that we've learned is we need to make sure that our leaders understand what we're looking to achieve and how to achieve that, right? We can't just say, hey, go have one-on-one meetings with your team members, because if you have 12 leaders that you're telling that to, you're going to have 12 different types of meetings. So a lot of the organizations that we have worked with in the past on this have actually developed templates, right, to follow. So in this case, this is from ATI, the physical therapy organization based in Bolingbrook, Illinois. When they created theirs, they wanted to have a 30-minute meeting every other week, and they wanted to follow this format. So there's an informal catch-up. That's when you're building the relationship with that team member and seeing how things are going. The next 10 minutes are what the employee wants to bring to the table, what their concerns may be, maybe something they're interested in as far as continuing education for the following year, whatever that may be. Then it's your notes, your maybe concerns or coaching areas, things you've observed. And then the last part of this is action planning. So both parties are walking away with something to bring back to the next meeting. So an actionable item that they can touch on when they get together again. Now, here's why this is so important. And again, I've asked you a few times to think back to what might be happening in your organization right now. So for those of you on the call that do indeed have one-on-one meetings taking place, ask yourself, how often are those meetings the leader and the team member getting together and the leader is just telling things to the employee, telling them maybe where they messed up, could have done better, maybe giving them a few shout outs for doing something great. But a lot of times it's just the leader saying things and usually reprimanding or finding fault, etc. Right? So if you don't have a template in place like this one, that's usually what you're going to get. Here's another great example from Alpenhaus. They're a retailer in Western New York. And they want to make sure that their team members, their leaders are talking about what's going well, How about those goals and that are in progress? On the personal side, right, the getting to know you, building that relationship, then they pivot over to the professional side. Same thing. What's going well? Where do you feel like you're really hitting the ground running and doing a great job? And where can you improve? And then what are your goals and where do you want to progress in this time frame? And then on the right-hand side, you see that there's an area for action items. So one of the things that's really important for effective managers is reoccurring one-on-one meetings. You can decide what the cadence is, right? We work with organizations that feel it's important that these happen weekly. We work with other organizations that these take place monthly and they work very well. We have other organizations where these may take place quarterly. So you decide what the cadence is. Sometimes you may have to ease your leaders in to make that time that I talked about. So maybe you start monthly, even though your goal may be to get to weekly. You decide what the cadence is. But a very strong recommendation coming out of today is A, start one-on-one meetings if you don't currently have them. And B, if you do have them, make sure that they're as effective as possible and not just punitive in nature, which is very often the case. A second thing to focus on, as far as creating effective leaders, is to make sure that we're celebrating and recognizing our team members, right? One of the things that we find is leaders don't necessarily understand, and when I say leaders, I mean managers and supervisors, not just senior level folks. Leaders don't necessarily understand that part of their job is to shout out their team members when they do great things, even when they do just a little above and beyond, right? Shout them out, make sure they understand, make sure you're celebrating. Celebrating and recognizing does two really important things. The first thing is it gives that employee the accolades they deserve for a job well done. So that's really, really important, and that gets missed quite a bit. But the second thing that it does, especially when you do it publicly, right, it's literally advertising internally to the rest of your team members, hey, these are the behaviors that we're looking for. If you'd like to get a shout out, here's a great example of what you could do for our customer as well, right? So it really accomplishes two important things. And again, think about your organization. Are your leaders, supervisors, managers, etc., currently out there actively looking for areas to recognize and celebrate their team members? A lot of times it's an afterthought. A lot of times it's not something that is top of mind, but it should be. It should be one of the top focuses that they have. So we work with organizations that create something like this, the Caught You Doing Something Right card. This is one that we have at the DiJulius group on the bottom of your screen, right? It's already made up. Anyone can grab one and use it. And when we heard of someone that did something great for one of our clients or one of our fellow team members, or anyone in our ecosystem, we can write a card and say, hey, Lindsay, you did such a great job helping client XYZ out with their issue, whatever that was. And it goes out to everybody so everyone knows what Lindsay did. So sometimes we have to put a system in place so that we are focused on that. And here's another interesting statistic. 63% of employees who are recognized regularly say they won't consider looking for another job, right? They're happy. Recognition is powerful, right? So how is recognition currently looking in your organization? We've done some work with larger organizations like KeyBank. It's based right here in Cleveland, Ohio, and they created an internal online community for peer recognition, right? They know that recognition of something that might happen out in a Denver location is important for everyone to hear. So they actually created a platform where they could share all of those great things internally. Doesn't matter what region you're in. You could be in Portland, Maine, or you could be in Seattle, Washington. It's a great thing is a great thing. A great internal story is a great internal story. So they make sure that they share them. Okay. How often do your leaders, supervisors, managers, etc., see themselves as a supportive coach? Now, I'm going to play a quick video here it's one of my favorite videos. It's from Simon Sinek. Some of you may have seen it before when Simon stayed at the Four Seasons in Las Vegas. While you're listening to this story, think about it from your organization's perspective. He's going to talk about two organizations. He's going to talk about the Four Seasons Hotel. He's going to talk about Caesar's Palace Hotel. Think about it for a moment. Are you more of a Four Seasons right now, or are you more of a Caesar's Palace? Let's watch and give it some thought.
Customer. I'll tell you a true story. A few months ago, I stayed at the Four Seasons in Las Vegas. It is a wonderful hotel. And the reason it's a wonderful hotel is not because of the fancy beds. Any hotel can go and buy a fancy bed. The reason it's a wonderful hotel is because of the people who work there. If you walk past somebody at the Four Seasons and they say hello to you, you get the feeling that they actually wanted to say hello to you. It's not that somebody told them that you have to say hello to all the customers, say hello to all the guests, right? You actually feel that they care. Now, in their lobby, they have a coffee stand. And one afternoon, I went to buy a cup of coffee, and there was a barista by the name of Noah who was serving me. Noah was fantastic. He was friendly and fun, and he was engaging with me, and I had so much fun buying a cup of coffee, I actually think I gave 100% tip, right? He was wonderful. So as is my nature, I asked Noah, do you like your job? And without skipping a beat, Noah says, I love my job. And so I followed up. I said, what is it that the Four Seasons is doing that would make you say to me, I love my job? And without skipping a beat, Noah said, throughout the day, managers will walk past me and ask me how I'm doing, if there's anything that I need to do my job better. He said, not just my manager, any manager. And then he said something magical. He says, I also work at Caesar's Palace. And at Caesar's Palace, the managers are trying to make sure we're doing everything right. They catch us when we do things wrong. He says, when I go to work there, I like to keep my head under the radar and just get through the day so I can get my paycheck. He says, here at the Four Seasons, I feel I can be myself. Same person, entirely different experience from the customer who will engage with Noah. So we in leadership are always criticizing the people. We're always saying, we've got to get the right people on the bus. I've got to fill my team. I've got to get the right people. But the reality is, it's not the people. It's the leadership. If we create the right environment, we will get people like Noah at the Four Seasons. If we create the wrong environment, we will get people like Noah at Caesar's Palace. It's not the people. And yet we're so quick to hire and fire. You can't hire and fire your children. If your kids are struggling, we don't say, you got to see at school, you're up for adoption.
So think about it for a minute. Think about your office right now, whether you are fully back in an office environment in your organization, maybe you're 100% remote, maybe you're a hybrid. Think about your organization right now. Are your leaders in their day-to-day operation, are they being supportive of team members? Or are they typically walking around looking for things that are going wrong to correct? Right? It's a mindset in a lot of organizations, right? That leaders have to fix things and leaders have to catch things that are wrong. Obviously the result is Noah at Caesar's Palace, who just kind of keeps his head down, doesn't want to engage with customers, doesn't really care that much about the experience he's delivering. He's just trying not to get caught doing anything during his shift, right? So it's a really important distinction, and one to think about at your organization. What's currently happening right now as we're together on this webinar, what's happening within your organization right now? So one other thing that I want to point out about creating effective managers is to make sure that your managers are actively helping your team members get to where they want to be. Help them map out a career path. Help them work towards wherever it is they want to go next, whether it's to get promoted to your current role if you're their leader, or they want to get to the marketing team, or they want to move over to the service side, or go into sales. Make sure you're aware of that and you're helping them get there. One other tool that I want to share with you as far as relationship building when it comes to leaders, and relationship building anywhere, whether it's with customers, whether it's in your personal life. This is a tool that we use really on the internal and external side of things. And so many people come up to us and say, I'm using this now in my personal life and building better relationships, etc. It is Ford. Now, I know a lot of you know what Ford is already if you've been around the DiJulius group for any amount of time, but Ford is an acronym that stands for family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. And the reason that we have this acronym, the reason that we're focused on these 4 types of important information, is because these information types are the things that are most important to us as humans, right? These are the things where we spend all of our time, we're most concerned about, where we spend our discretionary time and dollars, right? It's our primary focus in life, our family, our occupation, because what we do for a living is something that we use to really identify ourselves. Recreation, what we do in our downtime, our hobbies, what we enjoy, and then dreams, our goals, what we want to achieve, where we want to be, whatever that might be. So we look at this a little differently from the leadership side, right? Because when we're trying to learn forward information, and again, this is a great tool for relationship building. So if you're conducting one-on-one meetings and you're just starting that process, your leaders should be listening for forward information so they can build those relationships, learn about families, learn about recreation, etc., because they're so important. But one thing that's really, really important on the leadership side is the O, right? The O. We know what they're doing now, especially if they're on our team. We know what their current job is, but do we know where they want to go? Do we know what they want to do next? And are we helping them get there? Right? So it's such an important focus for our leaders to have. So forward, if you're not currently focused on forward as a leadership team, now might be a great place, a great time to start. So a couple of more things on leadership before we pivot over to creating a world-class internal culture. A couple of quotes that I love to wrap up our leadership side of things. Being a leader doesn't require a title. Having a title doesn't make you a leader. I love that one. Too many people have the title and don't really back it up. We see that all the time in lousy cultures. And then this next one from Sir Richard Branson, when he said, train people well enough so they can leave, treat them well enough so they don't want to. And that's really what our focus on leadership is all about. So now we're going to pivot over to internal culture. And we're going to talk about a couple of things on internal culture. So first thing is, if your culture isn't great right now, if you have a lot of rumbling, if there's water cooler talk and people are complaining and there's a lot of just, bitterness, etc., you can't necessarily hire yourself out of that, right? You can't just get rid of people and bring in new people, because it's not necessarily the people. And Simon Sinek mentioned this in that video. It's not necessarily just the people. The culture a lot of times is leading to that, right? And there's a couple of mistakes that organizations are making right now. Two big mistakes, right? Especially with a lot of turnover, and there was some instability with the job market ever since the pandemic, and not as many employees out there to hire, and shortages, et cetera, all those things. Some of the mistakes that organizations are making is, first of all, just filling positions with anyone, right? Because what you're doing is you are really putting your culture at risk, right? If you're just filling anyone, we call it warm body syndrome. If you just need people in because the phones are ringing off the hook and you lost some people and you got to catch up, if you're just bringing anyone in, right, what you're doing is you're starting to water down your culture and starting to erode your culture, right? So that's something that's really, really important. We always like to say, we'd rather keep a really good team together and make them work a little harder, make them struggle a little longer while we're finding the right person to then put into that team, as opposed to just throwing anyone in sooner. And then the other thing that we see, the mistake that's happening right now when it comes to internal cultures, is organizations are feeling forced to keep poor performers longer, right? Because it's harder to find people, they're harder to replace, longer lead time to get people and bring them on board, et cetera. More organizations are feeling forced to keep poor performers longer than they should. So think about that. Think about your organization. Are you falling into either of these traps? Maybe both of these traps, right? Where you're really just trying to get anyone you can in the door to fill positions, and they're not living up to your standards or even training up to your standards. Or you might be keeping some folks around longer because you're scared of what might happen if you don't have them, even though they're lower level performers. So here's the other thing that we need to focus on and really ties into world-class internal culture that we're going to talk about here next, is stop trying to find great employees and start to focus on being the type of business that great employees, they find you, right? You become a place where people want to work. They hear about it from their friends, their high-performing friends, that they love their jobs, they're satisfied, they're appreciated, all those things, right? Start to focus on being that type of company as opposed to going out there and trying to find these diamonds in the rough. They're out there, but they're harder to find. It's actually easier to focus on your culture, build your culture, and then protect your culture as you bring new folks in. So how do you do that, right? It sounds kind of grandiose. So one of the things that we talk about when we talk about building a world-class internal culture, it starts from hiring, right? So this is what we call the engagement indicator. So if you are on this webinar today and you hire with any sort of regularity, you might want to pay attention to this. If you have people on your teams that aren't on today but do hire, you might want to snap a picture of this and have them focus on this. So this is the engagement indicator, and it's quite simple to use, right? So during an interview, while you're interviewing that new potential hire, and you're doing your normal things, you're going down your list of interview questions, you're having that conversation, you're asking them those tough questions and some of those cream puff questions, all the things that we do during an interview. We also want to make sure that you're paying attention to these 4 things, right? Once you ask a question and they're answering you, how often are they making eye contact? How often are they looking you in the eye and being really sincere with what they're saying? How often are they giving you an ear-to-ear smile? How often are they showing enthusiasm to be there, to talk about the position, to talk about themselves? And how often do they engage naturally? It just feels conversational, right? So what we recommend is while you're doing your interviews, while you're conducting those and asking all those questions, I know some organizations have very structured process they have to follow, structured questions they have to follow. Other organizations, it's really up to the hiring manager to ask what they see fit. But regardless of what sort of structure you come from as far as the actual questions, focus on this as well. And here's why. Because if a person is interviewing with you for a role and they can't do this, they're not doing these 4 things, when they're there to sell themselves, to talk about themselves, well, then the chances are pretty good they're not going to do it on behalf of your brand either, right? It may just not be part of their DNA. So it's a really good signal to us if they are going to be able to engage with our customers. Now, if someone does not do well on this, on the engagement indicator, I'm not saying that they might not be a great hire. They may not be a great hire for a customer-facing role, right? Maybe they're more of a back of house. Maybe they're a finance person. Maybe they're somewhere else in the organization. But especially when you're focused on hiring externally focused folks, this is a great tool to use. So it starts with your recruitment, right? It starts with your interviewing and your recruitment process. One of the things that we talk about in world-class culture is the onboarding experience. What does your onboarding experience look like right now? If I asked you to take an inventory of your onboarding experience, what does it look like, right? In most organizations, it's 100% or pretty close to 100% of hard skill training, how you do the job, not many soft skill training in there as far as what we're all about, what our purpose is, what's important to us, customer service or customer experience training. Those things normally don't exist. So a couple of things that we recommend when it comes to your onboarding, one of the things that we've had great success with organizations is reorientation, right? We work with a lot of organizations that every 2 years in the organization, you go through orientation again, right? So there might be a new orientation class coming in, and there might be 5 or 6 folks that went through it 2 years ago, and they come in too, and they're both there for the week or however long orientation is, and they're going through it, right? There's a couple of reasons for that. One is your orientation is naturally going to get better over time because you're always adding content, building service aptitude and other things that you're working on. So you're naturally going to improve your orientation. So those people that have been around for a while are going to learn a few new things as well as getting a great refresher. And it's also a wonderful thing for the newbies to have some veterans in the class with them so they can learn some firsthand knowledge about the job, right? A lot of organizations have done well with scavenger hunt or some other gamification during the process. So it's not just all lecture and learn. And then do they know how to explain their new job, right? They're excited about where they work, but do they know what to tell others when someone says, hey, what are you doing down there at XYZ Corp? Well, what I do is, do they know how to explain it? It's almost like that little elevator pitch but of what their role is all about. And then are we making sure that we're touching base with them? Whether that's 15 days, 90 days, you decide the cadence. We work with some organizations that make sure they touch base at day 15, day 30, day 45, day 60, right? Because they know it's important to monitor their progress and monitor how they're absorbing the information. Are they overwhelmed, right? So how is your onboarding training, right? How much technical training is there? I said this already, but how much is it technical versus any soft skill training whatsoever? And are you certifying people in those soft skills as well? Right. So if you worked with us at all at the DiJulius Group, you may have a customer experience action statement. Maybe you create a day in the life of a customer video. Maybe you have a list of nevers and always behaviors that you follow as an organization. Or maybe you went through and created your customer experience cycle where you focus on the service defects, your non-negotiable standards, and the above and beyond opportunities. Or maybe you did zero risk, which is all about service recovery. The reason I list all these things out is because if you have these in place somewhere, they should be part of your onboarding. These things are just as important, if not more important, than some of the technical skills that people are learning during orientation. So what does that look like in your world? What tools do you have, and are you sharing them with your team members? So one of the things that we've learned over time is to really get a good understanding of where your turnover is occurring, right? So a lot of organizations obviously track turnover and know how many people were hired any given year, how many people left, but they don't always track it to the time in the life cycle of that employee, right? So one of the things we learned from our sister company at John Roberts Spa and other organizations have had this issue as well, right? If you lose a lot of people at 90 days, sometimes you might need to slow down your process, right? Sometimes onboarding and that new hire experience is so hectic, so overwhelming. You're throwing so much at them that they feel as though they can't keep up. They feel as though they made a bad choice. They're not in the right place. They can't retain it, and they choose to leave. That happens a lot. So if you're losing people before that 90-day period, you may want to take a look at how much you're throwing at them. And usually that also happens without support. Right? If you're starting to lose people after that 2-year period, a lot of times it may mean that there aren't enough carrots, or aren't enough things to motivate them, whether it be recognition, whether it be the opportunity to earn bonuses, earn other things, whatever that may be in your world. But that happens a lot, right? So knowing where your turnover is occurring. So very often we're working with an organization on world-class internal culture. We will look at specifically where turnover is occurring and then create some standards to make sure our leaders are delivering these standards at these certain times where we know that they may be vulnerable because of certain forces outside or other, right? So knowing where your turnover takes place can be really, really helpful. One other thing that I want to touch on, and then we'll open it up pretty soon here to questions. I'm sure there's probably a couple of questions. So often, excuse me, when it comes to world-class internal culture, we identify that there are issues with internal handoffs. So think about this in your world, whether you have a contact center in one location and multiple locations, whether it's storefronts or clinics or whatever it may be, whether you have a sales team and they get handed off to a service team, whatever that may be. Whenever there are handoffs in organizations, there's an opportunity for issues to take place. And that can really start to harm our internal culture if we're not careful. So one of the things that we do to combat this is start with what we call an internal communication best practice guide, right? And what we do is we want to make sure that we're looking at the organization. And when we're doing this on the consulting side of our business, we're working with a team of your leaders. So it's very specific to you as an organization, right? We're not saying, hey, you should do this and companies do this. We work some of that in there. But at the end of the day, this is your team creating it for your fellow leaders and for your fellow team members to follow. So here's just some examples of what some of those best practices look like, right? Identify the best communication channel for each team. I can't tell you how many times we hear complaints internally about how the service team never responds to emails. Well, guess what? They're not at a computer, right? They're on the go. They're in the warehouse. They're checking shipments. They're loading trucks, whatever it is, right? And so all they have is their phone. Maybe it should be a text message. Maybe it should be a Slack. So always make sure that you're using the proper communication channel for each team that you're trying to communicate with. A lot of organizations put this one in place. If it takes more than 3 emails, pick up the phone. Maybe it's too complicated. Maybe it needs more explanation. I love this next one. Explain the why, right? So many times an email goes out and just says see below or ASAP, right? But there's no intent or reasoning behind it. And it just becomes barking orders as opposed to a purposeful way of us working together to solve this customer's issue, et cetera, right? A lot of times things get missed when we don't include the why. And then be present, be focused with whoever it is that's communicating with you. So one of the organizations that we worked with, I shared them already, Alpenhaus, the great retailer in upstate New York, they created their internal communication non-negotiable standards, right? So one of them is always be detailed and thorough using all forms of communication, even in a text message, right? If it's internal, that you're getting all the information that team member may need. Be specific and assign an owner, right? How many times have you read an email and then just assumed someone else was doing it, or there was never assignment and it just kind of got lost in the shuffle? Own the task assigned, take accountability, follow up with an email date or time for completion. Next one is really important. Never assume the person you are communicating with knows what you're referring to, right? This may be their first email. They may not have been on the previous email chain, et cetera. So making sure that we're getting everyone up to speed. The next one is so important. Help yourself to the information that is readily available. I hear all the time from organizations that we have this really robust FAQ on our intranet, but no one uses it. All the information is there. It's searchable. No one uses it. A lot of times it's just a lack of training. People don't know it's there. They don't know how to use it. It feels easier to just pick up the phone, call my coworker and ask the question. A couple more. The subject is not the email, and then read the email completely before questioning. So some great tips there. Some of you, if you don't have internal communication tools in place, you may want to consider that. One more example that I'm going to share with you. This came to us from Bush, which is a funeral home. They own a chain of funeral parlors. They created their email never and email always list, right? So they got so granular. Email was such an issue and sometimes was causing issues within the organization. They create a list of things that you never do on email or things that you always do on email. I'm not going to go through them all. Again, you'll have these slides if you want to look through them. By all means, you can do that. So that's our time for today as far as content. I wanted to leave about 10 minutes or so for questions. I'm happy to take any questions you have. I want to thank you all for being here. And I'll also put up on the screen in case you missed it before. Here is the pre-order code if you want to get a pre-order in for the Employee Experience Revolution. Again, this will be on the slides that you get or on the video if you watch it again. And then also the Employee Experience Executive Academy. That's going to be new in 2024. We're really excited about it. It's a deeper dive into everything we talked about today, plus so much more. And if you want more information on that, you can scan that code, get to Claudia, and she can answer all of your TDG questions. So with that, thanks for being here, and we'll open it up to questions. Lindsay, what do we got?
I'm hoping people are typing, so I'm waiting. We'll give them a minute because I know you went over a lot and they might have had questions on the last couple pieces that you went over. So we'll give
maybe it was just so good there weren't any questions because 100%. It was just so clear.
That's it. You're that good. We know it.
There were a few things in the chat that I couldn't read, so I just want to make sure everything was good in the chat.
Yeah, I was posting the codes from the beginning just in case they needed them, but you brought them. So that's perfect. Let's see here.
I have a question for the group, for the audience, and they can answer this in the Q&A or even in the chat. What after you heard what we talked about today, what do you think the biggest obstacle is in your organization, right? For you to go back and start to implement some of these things, even to start to have these conversations in the organization. Often what we hear is kind of an old school mentality, right? We're paying our people a paycheck. They should come here and do their jobs. Or we don't have enough time. We talked about that one in the session. What do you think are some of the roadblocks that you all will face at your particular organizations?
It's a good one. Everyone's soaking in everything you want to. Oh, here we go. Dave, can you see the Q&A screen or no?
Let me see if I can pull it up. I haven't even tried yet.
I was going to say Corianne from First Fed. Hi, Corianne. Said,
Hi, Corianne.
she said, I have a to-do list. Time for one-on-ones, mapping out career paths.
Yeah. So those are all things, especially that mapping out career paths. You bring up a really good point, Corianne. Those are things that some of your leaders, especially newer leaders, are going to need a little training on themselves of what does that look like. Some they may have some experience they can refer back to their own experience of helping people and guide them through the process. But some of the things that we've talked about today are going to require, and Corianne, you know this firsthand, at First Federal, you have a steering committee that you talk about these things. Some of these things are going to require a small group to get together and create what the platform looks like, what you want it to look like for your organization going forward, and kind of create those systems, as opposed to having your leaders just kind of be forced to go out there and figure out as they go. So some of these things will need some work before they're rolled out.
All right, we got a couple more. So someone said being okay losing people, as some do not like change. And then
yeah, losing people is scary, especially in today's market, right? It's still hard to find people. It's gotten a little better, it feels like, but it's still hard to find people. Still hard to find the right people. So sometimes we want to cling on to the people we have because the grass isn't always greener. But organizations really have to take a look if that person is really all that effective, if that person is a good fit for the culture, because a lot of times they're not, right? A lot of times they may be sabotaging our culture.
Let's see. It says roadblock for one-on-one, removing obstacles for our leaders to create that quality time.
That's a huge one. It's a huge one. Fitting that in to their day-to-day. I'll give you a quick story. We work with a lot of contact centers, and when contact centers are maybe opening up a new wing, a new department, or maybe hiring 20 more people, one of the things they started doing, this is pretty new to the industry. One of the things they'll do is they'll say, okay, we need some supervisors for our new folks. So we're going to hire 10 new folks. How many, or let's say we hire 4 supervisors, how many team members can we give them? And one of the criteria they use is how often they want them to have one-on-one meetings and how long they want those to be, right? So if they want everyone who's being hired new into that contact center to have a one-on-one meeting with their manager once a week for 30 minutes, right? They say, okay, well, if we give them 10 people, that's 5 hours a week right there. So they start to build the job description around that first, right? So we need to give them 5 hours a week for this. It's got to be a priority. What else can we give them as far as duties, assignments? The thing is that's for a new build, so to speak. A lot of us, most of you, are trying to work this into organizations where you already have, that already exists, right? So how do you fit it in? And so again, sometimes you have to find things that are tasks that can maybe be delegated elsewhere to other team members. It's a difficult balance, but at the end of the day, really what you have to do is make sure that your leaders understand this is an organization priority. It's not a nice to have. In order for this to be effective, it has to be done well, and it has to be done consistently.
And then we had someone mention implementing reorientation for new and existing staff. That's a big one. Yeah,
that's a great one. It's so effective. It makes it more fun too, quite honestly, at the end of the day. So that's a great one to take away from today's session.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, you will be receiving a follow-up from me, again, including a video copy of today's presentation from Dave, his slide deck, and additional resources on how to reach out and who to reach out to from the DiJulius group for more information. Again, thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.